Good morning from the Penn State PennLive team. It is a Wednesday morning here. Max Ralph alongside Johnny McGonigal. It's another day of college football playoff ranking reactions. Penn State came in number 4 yet again, which is good because as we talked about a ton last week, Johnny, that pretty much means the Nittany Lions control their destiny, should have a first round home playoff game if everything goes the way we think it will down the stretch. But there's some other complications from this week that we wanted to kind of sit down and talk about. I'd say it's fair to have a little bit of concern for the Nittany Lions in the situation that they might, throw a stinker out there against Minnesota this week.
Yeah, Max, good to see you this morning, Wednesday morning, right after the Tuesday night rankings came out. Penn State at 4, like you said, is a good thing. They maintained their spot from last week. 4 of the top 5 teams are in the Big Ten, and I think that's a good sign. I mean, the fact that Oregon didn't lose to Wisconsin, so they stay at 1. Which validates Ohio State being number 2 after losing only by a point in Eugene. And then, Penn State hanging on at number 4, with its lone loss, obviously by a touchdown to Ohio State. I think those are good things for the Nittany Lions. I think Georgia winning this weekend and reinserting itself into the picture as a strong 2-loss team when they don't have anyone really left on their schedule. I think they play an FCS game or a group of 5 game, and then UMass. They play UMass. And then they finish the season against Georgia Tech, which they should win. Georgia, at this point, feels like, even though it's right now just in the 11th seed, it feels like they're in the field. And Penn State, at this point, I don't think can sustain another loss. We entered this season, Max, I know we talked about it. Bob talked about it. Just generally speaking, going into the first 12-team playoff, there was an understanding or a thought that like a 10-2 Big Ten team like Penn State would be in the field. And I don't think it's shaking out that way. Now, you look at ESPN's projections. I think ESPN, their FPI gives Penn State around an 87% chance to make the playoff, and around, I think it's a 68% chance of winning out. So there's a gap there. There's some wiggle room there, at least implied from the numbers, that Penn State could lose this weekend in Minnesota and still get into the field. And they would still be in the discussion, but I think at this point, they would be in a pretty bad spot if they were to lose, because then they're getting compared to all these other 2-loss teams, specifically in the SEC. And you've got Alabama, you've got Tennessee on the outside looking in, which is itching for a spot, has a bad loss against Arkansas, but also has a good win against Alabama. And I just don't think Penn State wants to be in that discussion.
Yep, I'm with you. I think the issue is, we all thought it was going to be, okay, a 2-loss Big Ten team should get in without issue. The problem is the Big Ten has become just as top-heavy as it was when divisions still existed, oddly enough, because you have powers that we expected to be a little bit better, like Michigan, USC, Washington, that have kind of, not really done so well this year. And Penn State, as a result, doesn't have a good win outside of that Illinois game. And while that is a good win, Illini found themselves at number 25 in this week's rankings. And I know we'll get to some thoughts on that later, Johnny, but the Illini are in the rankings this week. It's a ranked win. It was when it happened in the AP poll. Now they have made their appearance in the CFP. So that's good for Penn State. But outside of that, there's just not another one. I mean, Washington is struggling this year. They've been up and down, had like 1 or 2 good wins, but haven't really put it all together. Then you look at USC. I think that they had a good team, beat LSU, LSU beat them, didn't they? I'm having a brain
No,
fart.
USC won. USC won.
But that's what I thought. I don't know why in my head I was like, no, they're worse than that. But anyway, brain fart. It's early in the morning. But USC kind of fell off the table after the Penn State game. And so, it's weird that the Big Ten has become so top-heavy once again, because we expected, especially Michigan and USC, to kind of buoy some of those 2-loss teams. But hasn't happened. I think the other thing that really stands out to me about this week's rankings is what the committee did with Tennessee. I mean, I'm not surprised necessarily to see the Vols at number 11. However, that is, in my opinion, the number one reason why Penn State can't stomach another loss is because there are multiple two-loss SEC teams that are in or right at being in the field right now. And look, let's be honest, there's some SEC bias, and Penn State's strength of schedule and optics of best wins are not going to match up with what all of those teams from the SEC have. I think if Tennessee were to have fallen to like a 15, things would have been different. But yeah, we weren't really sure last week when we podcasted Johnny who the rooting guide was going to feature for Penn State, and I think now we can retroactively say it would have been much better for Tennessee to beat Georgia.
I think so too. I think the other thing is like when we talk about Penn State's resume and what it has going for them. First of all, I think Penn State's best resume point right now is a loss. Is how close they
Yeah.
were in that Ohio State game. And if Ohio
Yep.
State loses this weekend to Indiana, that could also, I mean, I don't think it would shift enough in the committee's eyes to push Penn State like out of the field or necessarily even out of a home
Mm-hmm.
playoff slot. But, you know, if Ohio State were to lose to Indiana and maybe Indiana comes out and smokes them, I don't think that's going to happen. If anything, I think it would be the other way around. But that could also, you know, shift the thinking a little bit on Penn State's loss to Ohio State. I think more pertinently, though, what the committee is looking at with Penn State is the eye test because Penn State, for the
Yeah.
most part, has been convincing in all of these wins. And, you know, the USC win, obviously not. Like they were down by 14 at halftime and had to come back and win in overtime. They were down at halftime to Wisconsin, but ultimately, with a backup quarterback, came back and won by 2 scores and even covered. So I think that for the most part, and again, obviously this past weekend, like we weren't going to learn a whole lot from the Purdue game, but the fact that they came out and won the way they did, you know, it's
Yep.
expected and it's what they did, right? So I think the eye test is a lot of what's going on right now with the committee and seeing Penn State. Strength of schedule too, and that win over West Virginia, I think, is carrying weight. The fact that they went out and scheduled someone, a power conference team in the non-conference on the road, I think goes a long way in the committee's eyes. And you compare Penn State to Indiana, and here's one thing, Max, that I don't really understand is that, you know, I know that Indiana is undefeated, and I love Indiana, and I think if they lose to Ohio State close, they should still get in the field because 11-1 in the Big Ten is pretty hard to freaking do. Penn State and
Mm-hmm.
Indiana are getting like lumped together by those in SEC country right now, and I don't agree with that considering the non-conference, considering the level of opponent that they've played in Big Ten play so far. I mean, Indiana played
Yeah.
FIU, Western Illinois, and Charlotte in the non-conference. So that's just my little
Yeah.
rant. But I think Penn State is still in a good position. Like if they went out, like they are going to host the home playoff game at Beaver Stadium, and right now they're projected to be the number 6 seed and host Georgia. And before, you know, people go ahead and say, "Oh, Georgia would kill Penn State," someone over at the Action Network, which is a sports gambling website, had projected lines out for the first round games that were projected through the bracket last night, and Penn State Georgia was a pick 'em,
Mm-hmm.
straight up.
Yeah.
So would love to see that game. By the way, I mean that'd be a hell of a time.
Hot. That would be incredible. I think this is a good segue to a comment we got from a subtext subscriber just now, Johnny. But Mike Reitz said there's a lot of talk about how the Big Ten is overrated, but yet the SEC is kind of cannibalizing itself. Some national pundits are, making some waves about this. I think a big one this week was Todd McShay, the draft expert. I think you have some thoughts on Mr. Booger McFarland over at ESPN. So maybe let's dive into that next, Johnny. Like, I know we've talked a lot about what it actually means for Penn State, but let's talk about the perception of the Nittany Lions right now, because I think we can all agree, win out, you're in, you're hosting a playoff game, lose a game, probably not making it because of what we've just talked about. So let's move on to, like, the perception is just kind of ridiculous right now.
It's beyond annoying, Max. I'm like, here's the thing. Like, when the 12-team playoff was announced, I was excited for it. I know some people didn't like it. Some people liked it. I was one of the people that liked it, primarily because I love college football and I love seeing more good, fun games. Like in a nutshell, in a
Mm-hmm.
vacuum, we're going to get more fun games with the 12-team playoff, and I'm down for that. And I can't wait for it to finally get here because the conversation around the 12-team playoff right now is just toxic. It's really like, and
It's
it's not that
terrible.
it's not that I didn't expect it to get to this point, but it's just terrible. It's just terrible to listen to. You just have hot take after hot take. You mentioned Todd McShay, who was with ESPN. I believe now he's with The Ringer. He was on a podcast with Ryan Russillo, who also had some frankly dumb comments earlier this week, or was it last week? I forget. But they were talking and they were just shooting the shit, and they were saying, "Oh yeah, like there's just no way that Indiana and Penn State are better than Georgia and Alabama and Ole Miss. There's just no way. There's just no way." I'm like, yeah, totally, bro. No way. Yeah, just trust me on that. It's not like Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. It's not like Ole Miss lost to Kentucky, and it's not like Georgia lost to both Alabama and Ole Miss, who lost to those crappy teams. Like what are we talking about
Yeah.
here? Indiana is undefeated. Penn State is only losses to Ohio State. These SEC teams have shown that they're beatable by mid to
Yes.
low level teams in their own conference.
Yeah.
It's not like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, they are cannibalizing themselves in that, Alabama beat Georgia, Ole Miss beat Georgia, Georgia beat Texas, Georgia beat Tennessee, Tennessee beat Alabama. Like, I get the cannibalization thought and everything behind it. But also, let's not forget about the crappy losses some of these teams have had in the SEC. And the Big Ten, Oregon is avoiding that. They avoided that at Wisconsin over the weekend. Ohio State has avoided that. They're only losses by 1 point at Oregon. Indiana is undefeated. One of those two teams will pick up another loss this weekend. And Penn State has not had a crappy loss. Like, they've had opportunities. Penn State could have lost at USC. They could have lost at Wisconsin. And they didn't. They've
Yeah.
been winning. So that bothered me. The other, he mentioned Booger McFarland. Cut me off at any point,
Well,
Max.
Johnny, let me
Jump in.
let me just throw something in really quickly on the
Sure.
topic of not losing the games that you could. I mean, Georgia's probably getting way more credit for barely beating Kentucky than Penn State is getting for coming back and having a really impressive second half against USC. That is just one thought that I wanted to add on to what you were saying, but go for it on Booger. Let it all go.
So he said, Booger McFarland, ESPN analyst, during the CFP rankings show on Tuesday night, when comparing Indiana and Penn State, and again, this isn't me going against Indiana because I do think they're a good team and deserve to be in the field. When comparing those two teams, he said multiple times that Penn State, quote unquote, struggled against UCLA. Max, you were there. I was there. They did not struggle in that game. They were up 27-3 before UCLA scored a garbage time touchdown with 16 seconds left against backups to make the score look more respectable, 27-11. Booger McFarland did not watch that game. There's no way Booger McFarland watched that game and saw Penn State put together a couple long scoring drives. Nick Singleton wasn't playing in that game. It was obvious with the USC game upcoming. Penn State wanted to get in, get out with a win, and do so comprehensively. And yeah, there were a couple of drives that stalled out, but like that happens to everyone. I just disagree with the notion that they struggled in that game. UCLA at no point was in that game or had an opportunity to upset Penn State. So that just blew my mind.
Right.
And I knew that there were a lot of other Penn State reporters and fans who were also watching the show last night that equally just mind blown. I mean, the ESPN product for the ranking show, here's another one. Greg McElroy, an Alabama, former Alabama quarterback, let's remember, when the rankings start getting revealed and Illinois shows up at number 25, he makes a comment saying, "Oh, I wonder why they are in there. I think it's probably to, I wonder if it's to boost Penn State's resume." And then at 23, Missouri comes out in the rankings, and Missouri freaking stinks. And he comes and he doesn't say a thing. It's like, well, Missouri's in there to prop up Alabama and Texas A&M's resumes because they kicked the crap out of them. Like, this has happened for years and years on end that, low-level SEC teams are getting tossed in at the end of the rankings to prop up, those two-loss teams' resumes. It's happened time and time again. But now that it happens for a Big Ten team, it's like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. Johnny, some comments are starting to roll in. I will get to some of our subtext people here shortly for quick hitters because I think we wanted this to be kind of a back and forth, let it all out episode. But I just like I don't know, man. Penn State's strength of schedule is what is it? I think 36. I literally just had it in front of me, but like I don't really understand how you can look at this and say the SEC is so much better than the Big Ten in any situation. Like, yes, does the SEC have more quality teams? Probably. I'd say that's probably true, but let's not act like it's a Mountain West situation where you have one, maybe two teams in the Big Ten that are good and capable of beating Power Four competition, and everybody else is just there. Like that is not the case. Like how many times do we have to watch a 8-loss Purdue team beat a number 2 team in the country randomly for people to understand that the Big Ten is full of the same caliber of athletes? Sometimes there's just a few more on one side of the ball, or there's better coaching on one side of the ball. Like especially this season with the Indiana and Penn State situations, I just don't get it. I'm with you, Johnny. We had one comment come in. I don't think it had a name attached to it, but it said if Indiana gets blown out at Ohio State, don't think they deserve to get in. What about you guys? That's a tough one because I think you have to reward an 11-1 team in a power conference in this model. I mean, that's what this model is for power conference teams who do well outside of the top heavy games that they play. Like the whole idea behind a 12-team playoff was to get teams like Penn State the past couple years going 11-1 in the regular season, 10-2 in the regular season, good teams that are just not quite over the hump into the playoff. And I do understand the aspect of if they're blown out at Ohio State, but you have to factor in that it's at Ohio State, and it's just tough because at that point you do say, well, Indiana and Penn State, both their losses were to Ohio State. Penn State's was close, Indiana's wasn't. I think it would be close. I think personally, I'd like to see Indiana in there because of the way that they've handled the rest of their schedule. I know it's a weaker schedule, but like we said, you got to play the games, and they've done it and they've handled them. I'd like to see the Hoosiers in, but I don't necessarily know that they'd make it.
I'm in agreement. Like in a base level, just again, talking about the 12-team playoff, what it's here for. I mean, really, the reason why it was created, we all know, is because of money, right? Like more games drive more money, et cetera,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera, for the TV
Right.
networks and everything
Right.
else.
The secondary reason was to reward teams that that deserve it.
The part that fans should care about of the sport is that,
Right.
obviously you get more teams in, but also like Indiana has been the story of the college football season so far. Them going
Yep.
undefeated with a first year coach and a bunch of G5 transfers going undefeated has been like the feel good, cool story of the season. If they get blown out, like what are we talking about here? Like if they lose by 40, then
Yeah. Yeah.
then I personally would question whether or not they would deserve to be in, because then you're looking at like, okay, is this team like, because then you look at resumes of one loss teams, and like BYU would have a better resume if they don't say they, even if they lose in the Big 12 title game. Like I think at the very least, like BYU even aside, because that might not be a great example. If I'll tell you
Yeah.
what will happen if Indiana gets blown out, they're dropping all the way behind Tennessee. They're dropping all the way
Yeah.
behind Tennessee. They're going to be 11 or 12. They're going to be in that conversation with SMU, with BYU, with those teams down at like 13, 14, 12 in that range. Because right
Yeah.
now the committee is rewarding winning. But if you go out in your biggest game of the year and get blown out and get embarrassed, and it's just not even close, and it's obvious that it's not close, then I don't think they're going to get in. And look, so personally, again, as a fan of the sport, I'm just rooting for Indiana. I'm rooting for a good game. Like anytime you see a game between highly ranked teams, you want it to be a good game. We're going to be able to watch most of the
Right.
game because Penn State plays at 3:30 against Minnesota
Yep.
this weekend. Um, and honestly, because the SEC people have bothered me and annoyed me so much, like I hope it's a really good game. Like I hope it's a 3-point game and
Yeah.
Indiana gets into the
Yeah.
playoff. And we've got 4 Big Ten teams in there. And you know what would even be better, Max, is right now with the projections, all the home playoff games are being hosted by Northern teams. You've got Notre
Yep.
Dame, you got Penn State, you got
Yeah.
Ohio State.
Yeah.
Have the SEC teams come up to Big Ten country and have them play in the North.
Hmm.
And not saying the Northern teams would win every game in those scenarios, but make them feel what it's like in Happy Valley in December. I think that'd be a lot of fun. And
I agree.
I think Indiana keeping it close against Ohio State would go a long way in doing that. At least having a game in Bloomington for the first round of the playoff, that'd be great. I don't think the committee's going to do it. I
Yeah.
think the committee's going
No.
to like if Indiana loses, the committee's going to stick Indiana with a road SEC game and make them prove it down there.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's a good leading point. We had a question about Boise State and the fact that the Broncos, as of now, are slated to get a top 4 seed because
Yeah.
of the way that things have shaken out. And the question was from Todd Snyder, and it was basically, all right, it sounds great to reward conference champions, but have we gone too far? Should it just be top 4 teams because of strength of schedule and all that stuff? So I think Indiana, because of the strength of schedule, even if they're in the field at 11-1, I don't think they should host a playoff game. Personally, I think it would be awesome to see. I don't think they should. I think they'd be at the bottom half of the rankings. But Johnny? Do you like Boise State being in line to get that top 4 seed right now? I mean, their strength of schedule, according to ESPN, is 77th. Some of the teams that are around them, SMU number 13 is down at 86. Notre Dame, who has the number 6 team in the country, has number 82 strength of schedule. Colorado is in the rankings. They're at 74, just above Boise State. Those are a few of the teams that are just in close comparison to what Boise State has done this year. But I think in that situation, you play the games again, and Boise State has handled the games that they can and only lost by 3 to the number 1 team in the country. So I think this is a situation we probably will have a year during the span of the 12-team playoff where it looks stupid to give it to the 4 highest ranked conference champions. I think that's going to happen. That's probably a thing, especially with super conferences existing, like with the Big Ten and the SEC controlling so much of the top talent. I think that will happen. We will complain about this in the future. However, I think Boise State, all things considered, if it goes this way, is a deserving recipient of that number 4 spot.
Yeah, I'm cool with it right now, and emphasis on the right now because I don't think it's going to hold up. I think you
Yeah,
look at where Boise is in the rankings right now. Excuse me, they are number 12. You've got
they're
BYU at 4.
13.
Who? Boise?
Boise State, or sorry, no, you're right. I was looking at SMU. I'm
I got
sorry.
you.
They
Yeah,
are
no,
12.
it's fine. Different, different kind of horse, right? We got the
Yeah,
Broncos and the
yeah.
Mustangs.
I'm looking. The
Uh,
logos are pretty similar, to be honest with you. So
well, one is red and one is blue and orange, but I'll give it to you. It's fine. Uh, I'm
they're
just
both
giving you.
horses, Johnny. Come on.
They are both horses. Uh, so Boise State right now is 12. You got BYU. Let's
Yeah,
talk about the Big 12. You got BYU at
yeah.
14. You've got Colorado at 16. Both of those teams control their own destiny to the Big 12 title game. And I know like that phrase gets thrown around a lot, controlling your own destiny. They truly
Hmm.
control their own destiny. They are in the top 2 spots of Big 12 standings right now. They went out. They're going to the Big 12 title game. And if that happens, if you have a 1-loss BYU against a 2-loss Colorado who are hovering around the top 15, whoever wins that game, I think is going to just vault themselves into that 4 slot, into that final first
Yeah,
round bye, and kick Boise out. And that's assuming Boise even wins out because They've got to finish this season. They've got to win the Mountain West. UNLV is lurking. I know UNLV, I think, needs some help from a loss from Colorado State to get into the Big 12 or to get into the Mountain West title game. I think it's pretty cool to see Boise in the spot that it's in right now. I think talk about stories of the season. If not for Indiana,
Yep.
we'd be talking about Boise even more than we already are, and that's because of the three-point loss at Oregon. I mean, they had Oregon on the ropes. They've dominated for the most part
Yeah.
every other game they've played this year. Ashton Genty is an absolute freak of nature, and again, I said it in I think week 2 or 3, writing in some of my writings. But like, if you guys have not watched Boise this year, stay up until 10:30 on CBS Sports Network on a Saturday and watch Ashton Genty cook, because that kid is ridiculous. So I think they've been a lot
Yep.
of fun. I don't think they're holding on to that first round bye. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, Johnny, you and I enjoyed that Boise State what was it, UNLV game a couple weeks ago. That was a lot of fun.
It was.
uh, anyway, yeah, no, I don't think I have anything else to add here. I think that the discussion around the college football playoff is infuriating for so many reasons, because at the end of the day, there are still 2 regular season games and conference championships to be played. This is really just a baseline that gives you a reference for how things are going to play out if X happens and Y happens. Like, that's why we talk about Penn State from the frame that if they win out, they're going to host a playoff game. If they lose, they're probably not going to be in the playoff. Like, that's what this is for. Getting all up in arms about like more SEC teams. Like, just let the games play out, because honestly, at the end of this, there could be more SEC teams. Like, that's the thing. Like, right now, I think the playoffs are in a relatively fair spot for pretty much everybody. Honestly, I think that for now this makes sense. This weekend is going to be interesting with Indiana and Ohio State, at least from a Big Ten perspective, to see what happens from the fallout of that. But for right now, for the games that have been played, I think this is pretty fair.
The SEC just has to stop complaining. I'm just I'm just sick of it. I'm just sick of it. Like, they've got 6 teams within the top 15. Like, I mean, let's not open up a whole nother conversation, because I think, judging from your wrap up comments, it's probably time to go. But why are we not talking about Texas again? Why are we not talking about
Yeah.
Texas,
Yeah.
whose best win is over Vanderbilt? Let's just not talk about the
I don't know.
Longhorns, though.
Like,
And I
if
guess,
this goes to
I guess you could say the same like thing with eye test and with Penn State, right? Like, both teams lost their biggest game of the year so far, and they went on the road to Michigan and played. So, like, I guess like it's a similar argument, but I guess my point is SEC fans are so hung up on where Penn State is and that they don't deserve to be number 4. Well, if your argument is that Penn State doesn't deserve to be 4, then Texas sure as hell doesn't deserve to be 3. Like, let's just put that out there. So, not to reopen the wound, Max. I think you stitched it up nicely when talking, when discussing the CFP. But it's infuriating. I can't wait for the games to actually get here. For our sake, in terms of covering a college football playoff game, it'd be pretty cool if Penn State won these final 2 and hosted a game at Beaver Stadium. That'd be pretty nice. But we'll see this Saturday. They've, like, in terms of the 2 games they have left, like, the tougher of the 2 tests obviously is this weekend in Minneapolis, and we'll see how they do.
Yeah. Minnesota's a good team. We'll have a lot more about that, of course. Bob and I will do a specific game podcast tomorrow on Thursday that you guys can check out. Yeah, I don't know. The Texas thing, like, there's probably an argument to put Penn State over Texas right now, if we're being honest with each other. Penn State has the better loss, but Johnny, you tend to have more of a national view as the AP, the good AP voter that you are, than I do. So I'm really just here to rile you up with these things, and I think I did a good job of that today. So this was a good podcast, and I'm going to reiterate what I said. They got to play the games. I think in a week, 2 weeks time, we will probably have a few less complaints about the CFP. Not none, because like there's always going to be complaints, but I think that it'll be shaken out in a pretty good way soon. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Blue White Breakdown on Penn Live. See ya.